All right, but with apologies for the interruption, I'm trying to get my slides. There we go. Okay, so you're seeing them now full screen and on the slide that we left off on. Let
Yes.
me pick right up. I assume that's the case. Tell me if it's not. Um, Pick right up where I left off, right? And so we were talking about the third point in this slide, which is that we know more about how people make up their minds than we used to. And frankly, it is a um, conclusion in the behavioral sciences that what you already believe deeply shapes the way in which you evaluate new knowledge, right? And there's something called confirmation bias that you are much better equipped to understand and assimilate knowledge and information that confirms what you already believe than you are to understand and assimilate new information that challenges what you already believe. And so that finding what people already believe and using that in order to shape and cater to their prior convictions is the best model for getting people to think or do what you want them to do, as opposed to making a rational argument to them. I'll give you a quick illustration. In the 2024 campaign, there was obviously only one debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And based on the polling, something approaching three-quarters of Americans felt that Harris won that debate. That's an exercise in rational persuasion. You're being interviewed by journalists or they're asking you questions. You're trying to indicate my policy positions are going to better serve your interests than his policy positions, right? And to criticize your opponent on the basis of what they've done or said in the past. That's an exercise in rational persuasion and trying to convince people to hear new information and respond to that information with an open mind to, if you will, go where the knowledge and the better argument leads you. And as opposed to that, right, social engineering, behavioral manipulation says, we know what this person already believes. How can we use that to get them to do or believe or buy what it is that we believe is in our interest for them to do, believe, buy, right? And so it's a fundamentally different mode. And one way I think to think about this is in terms of advertisement. If you think back to, right, the golden age of mass media, very often an advertisement contained a lot of language, right? And it tried to convince you this product is the better product than the competition, beginning already in the 1970s and 1980s, we saw a transition in the way in which advertising works. It stopped trying to convince you that the product being advertised was the better product, was more efficient, more economical, would better satisfy your needs or interests, and as opposed to that, started associating the product with an image. Look at how
David, you're gone again.
I'm gone again. So uh, thank you for telling me. Um, yeah, I am getting a notification that my internet connection is unstable, and I don't know why that is. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have an alternative internet connection, right? So there must be something going on in this area or my neighborhood or my house that is destabilizing the internet connection. Having said that, I am going to try to continue. Um, it does take probably a little bit more of the internet when I show my slides.
Yeah. Skip the
Please,
slides.
pardon?
Skip the slides.
Well, I'll go in and out of the slides, and you tell me if you're having trouble hearing me. Okay. So for now, I'm not going to go into my slides. I'm just going to talk this through with you. The result is this, right, of these new models of how best to get someone to think what you want them to think. Don't try to persuade them, try to manipulate them. His this has made its way into social media technology. It's made its way into advertising. It's made its way into political campaigns. And political campaigns are increasingly relying on social media as antenna, if you will. They work better than polls to show what the most effective message is. And very often, what they allow campaigns to do is to detect and harvest effective disinformation, right? And so the worry is that we are becoming a public sphere, our public sphere is evolving in a way where propagating lies or disinformation is more effective than telling the truth or making arguments. And so I think, right, the idea that Epstein lie is um, plaguing the uh, uh, right. I'm sorry, my computer's doing funny things. Is plaguing Donald Trump and his administration right now. So search social media for an effective alternative lie. The Obama conspiracy theories appear to maybe do the trick. Let's use them instead. And so I just want to now go through very quickly the kinds of lies this system propagates to give you a sense, right? So the Clintons, the Bidens, and the Obamas are all crime families, right? We've heard this a lot, especially with the Bidens. But part of what the Epstein files were supposed to do was to reveal that Hillary Clinton was in fact a child predator, right? Remember Pizzagate? She's, you know, actually trafficking children from this pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. It's so outrageous that it's almost laughable. And yet, it is also forming public opinion, right? And again, I just want to add the idea that when you encounter a conspiracy theory, you have to ask, why that conspiracy theory? How does this connect to a feeling structure, a sensibility, a plausible idea that you're trying to make sense of, right? And then actually give you a plausible explanation for something complex and difficult in your world, hopefully a plausible path to solving it. The idea that the 2020 election was stolen, please note, right, for uh, significant periods in the history from 2021 to 2024, maybe a fifth of the American population believed that unqualified immigrants are voting, unqualified meaning they don't have citizenship, so they shouldn't be participating in our elections, and that they are determining the outcome of the election. That Obama is an immigrant, not native born, and so is or was, in fact, unqualified to be president. The great replacement theory that the liberal, social, economic, political elite want to open the doors to immigration so that cheap immigrant laborers replace more expensive native born workers. And ultimately this is responsible for downward economic mobility, that COVID was a deliberate bio attack by the Chinese on us, and that the medical and political establishment used the response to COVID as a way to uh, control us as a population. Maybe that's just keeping us out of work or keeping our kids out of school or making us socially distant, shutting down movie theaters and restaurants, making us wear masks, or maybe the vaccine actually contains sophisticated biosurveillance technology. That Sandy Hook was staged, right? That in order to take your guns away. And I just I'll stop with right the enumeration of specific conspiracy theories, but want to note that the public who believes this, the subpublic who is taken into the social media rabbit holes organized around this information, are also inoculated against refutation, because the idea behind this is that the mainstream knowledge and information system, mainstream media, experts who work for the government or work for universities or who do independent research, are all part of the conspiracy. And so the information they provide, which apparently refutes the conspiracy, is actually part of the conspiracy. All right, so I think I am going to try to share my next slide. You tell me if this works. I've taken you through the slides that we were working on together. So give me a second, see if I can do this. Here we go. Um, the next thing to see, and this is, I know, a little technical, but the idea that when truth and falsity compete in social media, it isn't the case that the false ideas always win. I think that's exaggerated and lacking in nuance. But what does seem to be true is that false ideas spread more rapidly and are taken up by more people, and more people engage with them at greater length. And that's what this research, the complicated diagrams, are tracking and verifying, is that this potential to spread more rapidly, to go more viral, of false information. And the advantage here is, right, that the true information is very often not very interesting, not very shocking, not very engaging. And so while over time it may win out because it's true, in the short term, the stuff that is false but provocative does very well, right? And as it turns out, right, the number of cascades of false information in politics is higher than in any other sphere. And there are particular networks that seem to be given over to spreading this kind of disinformation. So very quickly, I'm going to add one more level of analysis here. And that is, right, that the social media system, so far we've talked about it in terms of its organization and political tendencies and what it's doing to us as a public, the way in which it's fragmenting us, and the susceptibility to the rapid transmission of disinformation. We haven't really talked about the structure of ownership. And as an example, I'm going to point to Elon Musk, right? And this is research done by the Center for Countering Digital Hate. They do very good research, and they show that in 2024, Elon Musk circulated on X, what used to be called Twitter, on the media platform that he owns, and that there is no doubt because, right, there are people who have quit working for him, who've come forth to say this, whistleblowers, if you will, that he manipulates, that he tinkers with the algorithm so that it spreads the ideas that he likes more rapidly and doesn't expose them to be false even when they're false, right? So Elon Musk generated a lot of content about immigrants who are not citizens voting in American elections. He did so using fancy diagrams that make it look as if it's verified information, when in fact, right, independent research shows it's absolutely false. And by the way, these misleading or false claims were shared 1.2 billion times on the media platform that he owned. So the idea that Democrats are importing voters, that voting is vulnerable to fraud, and a faked image of Kamala Harris saying that she was a DEI candidate and that people who voted against her were racist. This is the kind of stuff that circulates freely and rapidly in our new media system that makes us much more prone to conspiracy, to disinformation, and to fragmentation and fracturing. This is a real danger to American democracy. I think, in a sense, in late July of 2025 is a really good time to be reflecting on this, because we're seeing it. We're seeing it in what the big, beautiful bill is going to do to economic competitiveness and national security. We're seeing it in what is happening with vaccines. We're seeing it, of course, with what's happening with the Jeffrey Epstein controversy. It is, I think, now the case that we are fully aware of the transformation that is occurring to our knowledge and information system and the way in which it's influencing our politics. That's what I really wanted to focus on today. I do have plenty more to cover. I'm not sure whether I'll come back to this next week or we'll move on. There's obviously other stuff we could be talking about. With apologies for the interruption in the middle, let me stop there and ask you, do you have questions, thoughts, comments you want to bring into the conversation at this point? Who wants to start us out? Here we are using new media technology to criticize new media technology. I wonder if Zoom cut us off because it didn't like what we were saying. Um, Sorry, I won't engage in further conspiracy theory. Who? Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah,
Diane.
it's Ann. Yeah, I worry about the younger people who have never experienced anything else. What's going to happen to our world? I really, really worry because they don't seem to be paying that much attention.
Yeah, or their attention is captured and directed in ways that don't allow them to autonomously control it anymore. And so the Surgeon General has a couple reports out about this. There is an epidemic of loneliness that is strongly correlated with the degree to which you use social media. Please note the irony, right? Social media. This is supposed to network you and connect you, but it turns out that the kind of connection that you have when you're in an online social media environment, even when you are communicating with your friends, liking their content, they're liking your content, etc., is not as satisfying as direct face-to-face interpersonal contact. And please note that for many of these young people, the solution to their loneliness seems to be to engage more on social media. And then that leads them to have more loneliness. There's almost a doubling in the suicide rate among adolescents who use a lot of social media compared with adolescents who don't. And so it's not just undermining their capacity to control their own attention, to think for themselves, to identify reliable information, to be able to discriminate that from disinformation. It's actually harming them psychologically in ways that may lead them to harm themselves physically. So, and you're absolutely right. And in my own writing on this topic, I favor a public health approach to the regulation of social media in the same way that we didn't try to make tobacco products simply illegal, right? We could have tried to ban them, but we came to the conclusion that that wouldn't really work and that that would be an infringement on liberty, and that the better approach was to tax them, but also to educate the public about the health consequences of sustained tobacco use. I think we need to be doing something similar with social media. They should come with a warning, right? This stuff is bad for your brain, bad for your mind, and potentially bad for your psychological well being as well. And it won't be effective if it's just a warning. There has to be a national conversation about this. And of course, then that comes back to how badly damaged our public sphere is. There's a chicken and egg problem here. But I do agree with you, Anne, that we should be especially worried about younger people. And then let me just add a worry about democracy as well, which is because this makes people susceptible to, among other things, political manipulation, because it makes it more likely that people are going to demand that their governmental representatives legislate and create policy on the basis of ideas informed by disinformation. The idea that younger people are going to be, right, a growing portion of the electorate, and that our democracy may become more and more dysfunctional as a result, is another reason why it's incredibly urgent that we address this problem. Thank you, Anne. David, go ahead.
Yeah, well, as I was listening to you and I was asking myself the question, what would allow anyone or everyone to tolerate this view of power and manipulation as the fundamental basis for communication? And it strikes me that in order to hold that view, you have to reject all the classical ideas we've had about what's right, what's just, and what's fair, so that the we have to just um, dump everything that as a as the human race has learned about morality and ethics, that doesn't count. That anything you can do to manipulate others, as long as it results in your being able to impose your will on someone else, is the ultimate good.
Yeah, I hope not. I
Well,
understand.
how else can you justify lying? I mean, one of the fundamental things that both civics and religion are supposed to teach us, all religions, is that truth matters. And this is a post-truth society we live on. It's not truth. It's the outcome that matters. And a hallmark of democracy is due process. Process doesn't count here. It doesn't matter whether you played by the right rules. What matters is whether you got the right outcome.
So I'm not going to wholly disagree with you, David, but I'm going to say I think we need to have a more complex analysis of how we got to where we are, right? And so it is real, it is true, it is verifiable that economic developments over the last 40 years have rendered our society much more unequal. And not just more unequal, but much less fair, right? I think part of the thing that makes Jeffrey Epstein so potent as a crystallizing symbol of what's wrong with America is, what the hell did he do to get to be so rich, to have a private plane, beautiful apartment in Florida, a beautiful townhouse in Manhattan, and his own damn private island, right? And as far as anyone can tell, he didn't really do anything productive, right? He just used the network of the wealthy and the promise to make the wealthy even more wealthy, and the promise to allow the wealthy to satisfy whatever desire they had, no matter how immoral, right? That's the way the new wealthy elite work. And in that environment, then there's a lot of pent up anger and grievance. And that's the environment in which it's much easier for a conspiracy theory to take hold. And sure, Donald Trump is a serial liar. The philosophical literature actually has a technical definition for a bullshitter, right? And that's somebody who isn't lying knowingly in order to deceive you, but is simply truth indifferent. They'll say whatever they need to say. If it's the truth, fine. If it's false, fine. And that's the kind of person that Donald Trump is, right? I think we know that. But having said that, right, that the idea that this was a fertile environment for Donald Trump to succeed in depends not only on the transformation of the social media system, or the media system with social media coming to prominence, it also depends on how unequal and unfair and corrupt our society has become, how unresponsive our politicians were to the urgent demands of large portions of the population. And Donald Trump, to his credit, while it's not the case that he's going to do anything to actually fix this or help this, at least connects with it, at least makes people feel he gets it, he hears it, and he's going to, if you will, amplify their anger and their grievance, even if he's not going to fix the situation. I think, right, that helps us to see, if we want to return to a world in which, truth has a fighting chance, in which verifiable information is part of our public discourse, in which our public policy is responsive to what experts believe is actually effective. We have to restore the sense that that kind of politics actually works to address people's urgent needs. And it's one thing to say, well, there's a measles outbreak, and this wouldn't have happened if we would have better and more competent people at the CDC, or there's a catastrophic flood in Texas, and we would have been better able to respond to it if we wouldn't have gutted FEMA and the National Weather Service. Sure, that's true. So we're suffering as a result of the fact that we have an administration that is a post-truth administration. But the deeper source of all of this is not just a desire for functional government. It's a desire for responsive government, for accountable government. And we need to be able to show you can have accountable government that relies on expertise without being hijacked by an elite, if we're going to redeem that promise of democracy. Is that making sense, David? I
It,
hope
it
that.
does, except I don't see how it mitigates against the complete abandonment of due process as the fundamental basis for making important decisions, and when interests conflict and the like. And it also seems to me that the way that the Democrats were at fault is they implicitly said, if we want to be responsive to the rights of one group of people, those who've been traditionally marginalized in our society, it's going to cost. And you poor white folks are going to have to bear the burden of our cost, of that cost. And that was not only a bad political calculation, it was an immoral and a calculation by my standards and the like. But I still contain that religion and civics are asleep on the wheel for not paying attention to helping kids come to terms with these important moral and ethical dilemmas that are at the heart of any system of governance.
Yeah, so I'm not going to disagree with you strongly. I wanted to complicate the picture, but I'll just
Sure, sure. No, no, you have, and I
yeah.
respect that, and I agree with your analysis on the insensitivity of the so-called woke movement and what. So,
Well, and then I'll just add very quickly, the Republican Party right now is dominated by a single individual. They worry that they can't win elections without basically falling in line behind him, and he uses his power to bully everyone into submission. And so that's not to put it, in the nicest possible terms, deliberative process of public opinion formation or policy formation. That's autocracy, right? And autocracy, particularly the personalistic kind, is notoriously irrational and punitive and dishonest. Look at Putin's Russia, right? And so yes, part of this is about the fact that the Republican Party, which for decades has used the evangelical movement as its kind of social movement anchor, is now falling in line behind a man who is a bullshitter, who doesn't know the difference between truth and falsity, who is totally transactional, who is doing the bidding of his corporate sponsors and funders and the people who are buying his cryptocurrency, right, to the long-term detriment of our national security and our long-term economic interests. And so yes, the Republican Party in this moment is bankrupt. And by the way, the Democrats are not doing much better either. I'm not sure I completely buy that they sold out the working class in order to promote racial justice or gender justice or sexuality, equality for different forms of human sexuality. But having said that, they certainly couldn't figure out how to square the circle, how to emphasize those issues while at the same time saying, and by the way, we're the party that gave you Obamacare. We're the party that gave you Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and we want to extend and strengthen those programs, make them 21st century programs. So yeah, that there is a problem there for the Democrats as well. All right, everyone, we've gone long again today. We obviously had that little hiatus in the middle, but I know you guys got to get to lunch, and me too. Wonderful being with you as always. Not sure what next week holds, but there's a lot more to talk about on this topic. So it's possible we'll return to this topic unless there's more pressing news for us to discuss. In the meantime, be well, take care, and look forward to seeing everybody next Saturday. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.